everybody. How you doing? It's the rookie private pilot. Ask us anything. I almost spit that out. Oh my gosh. Nate, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I am doing great. This is exciting. I'm kind of thrilled. This is going to be a lot of fun.
I've been looking forward to this a lot.
Yeah, so just, well, before we get started, first and foremost, the disclaimers, right? You got to have the mandatory disclaimers because, well, you know, we don't want to get in trouble. So here's the deal. As the name would suggest, Nate and I are brand new pilots, all right? We just passed our check rides. Yours was in November too, right?
October. Yeah.
October, okay. So October and November, we ain't been at this long, which means none of this is meant to be instructional in any way. Everything that we're here, this is about entertainment. This is about sharing our experiences. Everything we say is going to come from our experiences. We are not representatives of the FAA. We are not trained flight instructors. I can't promise you everything we say is going to be accurate or the best idea. So take it.
I'm sure anything is not accurate, they'll let us know in the comments.
I'm sure. Yeah. I mean, I've got people already telling me, and, you know, post from earlier today on Facebook how nuts I am. But so, you know, let's roll right into it. So for those of you that don't know, if you're watching us on Facebook or you're watching us on YouTube, participate in the chat. We'll get your messages. We'll answer your questions either as we go along. We might save some to the end. We'll see how they fit in. But we're here to really share a little bit of our experience, but answer your questions about what it's like to be a student pilot and, you know, become a private pilot. Still kind of setting in. So you got your certificate today, I hear.
I did, yeah. It came in the mail today. That was exciting. So I feel like everyone always asks, like, how long does it take? And I guess in my case, it takes 2 months and 9 days. So I don't know, but I've been flying with a paper certificate until now, but I just got the actual plastic hard copy just a few hours ago. So that was pretty exciting.
That's the end of a long journey. How did your journey even start? Let's just start there, right? Like,
sure, yeah. So yeah, in terms of like when I first became interested in airplanes or when I first decided I wanted to be a pilot, I couldn't tell you. I think that I was an airplane nut since like the day I was born. I think that kind of stems from, I grew up at near China Lake Naval Air Station, so I was watching FA-18s flying over my house all the time, and, you know, hearing sonic booms, and so I was just always into airplanes. So for a long time I wanted to be an F-18 pilot, but I realized that I didn't necessarily want to be active military. So like, I admire the people who do that, but I didn't know that I wanted to like sign my whole life away. So I thought, well, I could be an airline pilot, but I wasn't really that interested in flying in a straight line all day either. Which honestly, now knowing what I do now, I feel like actually both of those careers perhaps would have been great fits for me. But at the time I was like, you know, it'd be cool to be a pilot, but I don't know if I want to do it professionally. And then I remember when I was like 12 or 13 was the first time I found out that you can be a pilot without being a career pilot. And I was like, oh, I want to do that. It was just like an old cassette tape that my parents brought me, or like bought, and it was this guy just talking about his journey to being a pilot. And I'm like, oh, I can do that. And then for a long time, it was just the cost was probably the biggest inhibitor for me. Like I'm a pretty cheap guy. I tend to be thrifty, and it's hard for me to dedicate funds for something that's just for fun. You know, like you can't eat your pilot certificate, so it's.
You could. It's not going to taste.
I suppose you could.
Yours is made out of plastic now, so you know.
It would have been easier to eat a few hours ago. But either way, it's not the best meal for like $11,000. But anyway, so
Ron Geek's message here is like perfect, because this is one of the things I love is everybody's got a different story, right? And there's never a too late. So, you know, 57 just getting started, and there's so many stories like that. But I think the cost is like kind of a problem for, you know, a lot of people earlier in life, right?
Yeah. So how about you? I mean, when did you first like get interested in it or decide?
So it's so weird because like I know all these people who are like pilots now, or like, you know, always went to the EAA and all this stuff. Like I live an hour from Oshkosh, never have been
Really?
to the EAA, by the way. But you know, I don't remember exactly when, but it's kind of similar to you. Like I grew up in the shadows of a little airport in Milwaukee called Timmerman, and it's just, you know, it's the little, you know, general aviation airport. I think their runways are like 3,400 feet and maybe 3,900 or something. I mean, it's a small airport, Tower Class Delta, but so they were always doing circuits over the top of my house. And I'd go driving down Appleton Avenue, which is like one of the streets, and you know, people coming on 22 right would be landing right over the top, you know, 50 feet off the ground as they're coming over the top of your car. And I was like, so I always had the bug, but I didn't grow up in an aviation family. I didn't ever really think it was attainable, right? And part of the reason I never got in like the EAA was because I didn't really understand what general aviation was. Like I knew there was the airline side, right? Like, okay, yeah, there's all these, you know, you can do it as a job, or there's all these experimental people who, my mind, experimental was they built airplanes from the ground up, like with, you know, sticks and wood and whatever, like, you know, a kid airplane, what's that, right? So I never thought it was like an attainable thing. I dreamed of it. It was always like, oh man, it would be so cool to be a pilot. Oh my God, I would love to fly airplanes. But I never really understood what those people were doing when they were flying over my house. And then, you know, it kind of was always this dream when I found out in my mid-20s that like, okay, hey, this is like something really cool you can do. Then it was like, then it was kids and, you know, time and money and all those things. And then finally I reached a point in my life where it's like, yeah, my kids are all out of the house. I'm divorced. I have a good job. I have money that I can actually save up and do this thing. And here I am. So I got to say hi to One Dull Geek because he popped in here. And for those of you that don't know One Dull Geek's channel, be sure to check it out on YouTube. He's got some great stuff. Yet another Cherokee flyer, by the way.
Yeah, that is true. Yep.
So that, you know, that makes at least three of us here.
One Dull Geek also gets the claim to fame of being my first subscriber who I didn't know. So like that was a big victory day for me. It's like, hey, you're not my sister or someone, like someone who I don't know actually found my channel. So that was exciting when he subscribed.
I love it. Low wings for the win.
That's right.
Yep. Totally with you. So yeah, there's a good question in here already from Samantha. She asked, how did ground school go? And how did you choose one? For that matter, how did, you know, I think in this you can also lump your CFI, right? How do you even choose a CFI? Sure. That's a question I think a lot of people have. Mm-hmm. So I mean, like, yep. So for me, you know, it was, my big thing was I didn't want a CFI who was 20 something looking to go to the airlines, right? Like I watched a few guides on how to pick a CFI. I read up some stuff. I didn't want to get in with a CFI and then have them disappear or find out that they're just not very good at teaching because the only reason they're teaching is to build the required flight hours that they need to get somehow. And that's one of the most common ways. And so, you know, that was like the first thing. For me, it's helpful because I live a mile away from the local municipal airport. I went in there and turns out the instructor they have is, you know, I think in his 70s, maybe late 60s. He's got like 15,000 hours as an ATP. And I'm like, all right, well, clearly a guy who teaches for the love of it, he's going to be around for a while. And then, but as far as ground schools, so I actually used two. I used Sporties and Gold Seal. So I started with Sporties like before I ever even talked to an instructor. Like I just bought it. I'm like, even if I never take lessons, all right, you know, this is just good stuff. It'll be interesting to learn. And then when I found the CFI, he was the one who pointed me at Gold Seal. And it's, you know, it's more expensive, but I'll say I was at least glad I did both because Russ Still, who does Gold Seal, like his teaching style just meshed with me, right? But Sporty stuff has really cool, like the features and some of the test prep, especially, I really, really liked. And I spent a lot of time on commercial airliners, so it's cool at the Sporties one you can watch when you're offline. But And what about you? I mean, what was your ground school experience?
Yeah, and one thing for sporties I'll say is that they have some good resources, even if you don't buy into their ground school. Like they've got good test prep resources, even for free. So I definitely recommend checking out sporty stuff, whether you go that route or not. So ground school actually plays a important role for me in terms of getting started. Because I'm fortunate that I actually work. So I'm a software engineer, but I work in a company that's related to aviation. And one of the fellow employees there a while back said, you know what, I'm going to see if I can get the company to sponsor a ground school. So I actually was able to get ground school for free, which was really cool. That's not something everyone's going to get, but it was cool. And they had done it. So every year they would do a session of ground school. And every year, like people would invite me and I'd be like, you know what, I would love to do that, but it's just hard to make the time work because I've got 3 little kids at home and, I'm busy. But then actually, I guess COVID kind of saved the day for me because that's when they decided that they would do the ground school via Zoom. So I was like, hey, I can attend. And, so like half the time I was like cooking dinner while I was watching ground school, but I was like, hey, I can attend now. And I was not planning on getting my certificate immediately. I was like, hey, I'll do ground school. And then, one day when I'm years down the road, when my kids grow up, then I'll take ground school again for real and actually get a certificate. But that's kind of when I really got that fire going. And I was like, okay, yeah, we're going to do this. And I got so annoying talking about airplanes all the time that my wife was like, can you just do it? Like, when are you going to just do it? So I was like, okay, yeah, let's do it. So anyway, my ground school, it was not exactly in person or exactly online. I guess it's somewhere in between. But it was good. And then in terms of choosing an instructor, I think that you're right. There are some instructors who are like career instructors. There are some instructors who are just trying to build hours so they can go to the airlines. And I'm sure that some of them are great instructors as well. Like, not saying that anyone who wants to be an airline pilot is a bad instructor, but it is something to like look out for. Like, is this someone who loves teaching, or is this someone who just needs to get paid to fly? And so for my instructor, he was neither. He's actually a professional test pilot, and he just does some instructing on the side. And how I chose him, he's the one I could find. I looked all over. Like, there are no professional instructors in my area. There's one flight school that's so backed up that I'm still technically on a waiting list for them because I never told them that I never told. I'm hoping like one day they're going to call me like, hey, we have room for you. And I'll be like, you can't have my money. I already got my certificate.
I got this plastic thing now. Right. I'm good to go. Yeah, exactly. But that's legit too, right? I mean, because that was one of the things I don't know about you, but I looked at this. A lot of people say like just the proximity. Like I was actually shocked how many students start this and don't finish.
Oh yeah.
Right. And they said for a lot of them, it's just they get into it and after, starts to take its toll for a little bit, like, oh, I don't want to drive 20 minutes or a half hour or 45 minutes to the airport to do a flight this week or, so, I mean, for me, I was very glad that when I got to that airport, okay, it was a good instructor that I felt comfortable with. Like if I had to go all the way up to Oshkosh, an hour drive, like I'm sure I could have found a million instructors up there. I know that they're there, but
then you spend more time driving than flying.
Right. I'm burning an hour's worth of gas each way just to get there to go flying for, an hour or 2 hours. And
yeah, same here. Like I live in a little town called Rosemond, which actually has a residential air park, but I couldn't find an instructor at the air park. But I'm like 15 minutes from Lancaster, which has an airport, and I found an instructor who's willing to teach there. But if I couldn't find that, I would have to go to Van Nuys, where again there's like tons and tons of instructors, tons of rentals, but it would be like an hour and 15 minutes, and I just didn't want to do that.
So, going back to ground school, we had I hope he's on. Because we had someone actually leave a question like a couple days ago already in the chat, and this was a really good question because I was thinking back on it. I'm like, I can't remember. Like the written seems so long ago. For me, it was the end of June, but it feels like forever ago. And I'm like, I don't even remember what the hardest question was. I think it was something related to like lenticular cloud formation or something, with the mountains and the weird looking clouds. But yeah, for the life of me, I even tried to go back through Sporties and try to find like what were some of the questions that I had on the test, but I don't know. For me in general, the weather was the hardest. I joke with people. I'm like, I never dreamed of becoming a pilot. I would actually have to become a meteorologist.
Oh, it's true. There's a lot of weather you have to learn. And yeah, I was looking at that question too, and I also struggled to think of one. So for me, my written was, I think, like a year and a half ago. I took it quite a while ago because I was on that waiting list for that flight school for most of that time. But one thing I will say about the written is that none of the questions should be a surprise.
No.
Like, exactly what's going to be on it. If you take the practice exams from Sporties, like the written test is going to be just like the practice exams.
100%.
So none of them will be, it won't be a surprise at all.
In fact, I'm gonna.
But yeah, for me, meteorology for sure is hard. Go ahead.
If you're getting ready for the written, go buy this. Okay, this is the book they're going to give you in the written exam. You can buy this, all right? Go get it, because you can see I have it tabbed on right now. You can't bring your own to the written test, but this was such a great study guide because, first of all, I knew exactly which ones were going to be on the test and which ones were for like seaplanes or other things and gliders and stuff. But you can see I have Post-it notes and stuff with notes. I mean, probably about, depending on the mix, like half your questions are going to come from this book. And you need to know all of these diagrams, so you might as well study them.
Yeah, no, I agree. And there are tons of good resources out there as well. And like I said, yes, Sporties has the practice tests, and I just went through those like a whole day. And I think for me, the meteorology was also hard. The other hard thing for me was the legal stuff, because the nice thing about at least the meteorology, at least there's some science behind it. Like, you can kind of eventually understand the concept and know what's going on. But for the legal stuff, it's like, well, this is the way it is because this is what the FAA chose. Like, there's no way to like prove it to yourself.
Yeah, that big blue book that I'm trying to point at, and I can't because I don't work backward very well. But yeah. That's the stuff that's hard for me too, like that rote memorization stuff, right? Like, if there's a logic and a flow to it, at least for me, that makes more sense. I can remember that. Trying to remember that, okay, 91,205 is 8 tomato flames, and here's all these things. Like, why are those the things? Oh, well, there's not really a rhyme or reason to it. It's just that's what the FAA says you got to have.
Exactly. Yeah. So. And I'd say the hardest part for me related to that is the cloud clearance minimums for different airspaces. So like you have, based on, whether you're in class Bravo or Charlie or Delta, and it's day or night, exactly how far do you have to be away from clouds and everything. And you just have to memorize it. And, and it's just rough.
I'm going to ask you this. Did you do the
triangle thing?
Minimums triangle thing or pyramid or whatever?
I saw that, and honestly, it didn't click for me. So I don't know. I saw so many different ways to show it, and none of them click for me. So I don't know. Maybe I just have like something in my brain where like I cannot learn the weather minimums. But.
So how for like the you go in to do the written, and they give you a piece of paper. They give you like a couple pieces of scratch paper.
Uh-huh.
That was literally the very first thing I did when I sat down. Was I drew that whole thing out. I'm like, because I like studied it for days leading up to it. I memorized exactly what it looked like. I'm like, that is the first thing. So I just drew the whole triangle, got it all down. I had one question about airspaces and minimums. I'm like, all that.
Yeah. Well, I felt the same way about the oral test because I reviewed all those really thoroughly for the oral as well, and the DPE just asked me nothing about that. I mean, he like mentioned one thing about it maybe, but it's just like, wow. But you don't know what you're going to be asked, so you have to study everything.
So since we're talking check rides, and we don't have to go in any order. I know we had kind of an order, but we're out the window with that already.
Sure.
But, I mean, this was a really good question. So how different is the check ride from the rest? How did you know you were ready? That's a really good question. I don't know about you, but for me, I didn't know I was ready. In fact, I didn't think I was.
That's what I was going to say. So I knew I was ready when the DPE told me I passed.
Yeah, when you're on that last landing, right? And you're like, okay, this is it. This is the last thing I got to do. I just have to land it and put the plane away, and I passed. And I know this because, by the way, if you didn't know this, folks, if you fail at any point in the check ride, they have to tell you, like at that very moment. So if you get to the end and like, okay, this is your last landing, you're that close. You've almost passed. So,
and I'd say that's my favorite thing about the check ride is that they have to tell you when you fail. Because when you do a maneuver and you're like, wow, that was not my best work, if they don't say anything, you can just like put it behind you. And, you know, like I never have to do a steep turn again for the rest of my life is what you can think at that point. Right. And like you just focus on the next thing. Right.
Yeah.
Not that I'll never do a steep turn again. But, you know, the point is like once you do it, forget about it. You know. The
first flight review, you're probably gonna have to do one or two. I'm betting.
Perhaps, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, how is it different from the rest? For me, I'm curious what your experience was like. The flight time was 0.7 hours. Okay. Like we were back in 45 minutes, and the reason is, at least my DP had this thing down to a science. It was like take off, climb to altitude, turn on course, figure out your deviation or your diversion like almost immediately, because if we had gone too far, there just weren't any airports. It would have been, they were all the airports that we were going to fly over in the route anyway. But then it was like right after he's like, okay, steep turns next. And he's like, and we'll use your steep turns as your clearing turns. So just make sure, do a quick check. And we did that. And, and just everything flowed like one right into the next. It was straight out of steep turns into, I think we did like a emergency descent maybe. And then that emergency descent went straight into the power off. Or no, before that we did the IFR foggle stuff. But in any event, it was like one thing into the next. So it definitely was not like instruction, at least for me.
Yeah.
I mean, what was your experience like?
I agree that it for me as well, that was, kind of quickly like, yeah. And on one hand, it's even like a little disappointing because I'd practiced, slow flight. I'd practice it for minutes at a time, but with the examiner, it's like, okay, I'll practice it and like, okay, yeah, you're good. Move on to the next thing. Like, well, can I show off a little more? But I'm glad that he didn't let me, because honestly, it wasn't really even that great. But my flying was not my best on my check ride either.
No.
But one thing that did take us a little longer, and may have been a good thing or a bad thing, is a little bit before I started my check ride, this guy comes by and he says, hey, just so you know, the tower's not going to allow any closed pattern work today because the county is surveying the runway and they only want, necessary takeoffs and departures. So we're like, okay. So we had to go fly to a different airport to do all of our landings. And that kind of threw me off a bit. I had been to that airport before, but I wasn't nearly as practiced with it as the other one, right? But on the other hand, that may have helped me a little bit because I think the DPE was a little more generous with his evaluation. Cause like, yeah, I know you're not as used to this runway. And like, so if I did something poorly, it's like, well, this runway's wider. It throws off the view and everything. Like, yep, that's why. So it was a little bit longer, but still only like an hour.
Yeah, no. And that I was shocked, but I threw this question up here from Ramgi because this is perfect timing. Yeah, the weather is important because you just covered a bunch of other things that can go wrong, right? Well, I got up in the morning, I looked at the weather, and I'm like, I had to really sit down. There were air mets from the night before. There were all sorts of stuff. So now I'm looking at trying to figure out, okay, this icing air met, where is that? And is that going to impact me? And, there's, I'm looking at the expected cloud cover, right? And there was a layer of overcast rolling in, and it actually got to the point where at the end of the oral part, I'm sure most DPs do this. I've heard a lot of people say this. He's like, so are we going flying today? And I looked him dead in the face. I said, well, if I knew that we were actually going to make this flight all the way down, mine was to Chicago Executive. I'm like, if I knew we were going down to Chicago Executive, I'd tell you no, because there's just no way. But since I know that we're not going past West Bend where I live, I'm like, we're fine up here and we can do this flight. So yeah, let's go. And, but I think that's kind of one of the crazy things are the things that can go wrong. Did you have other surprises like in the lead up or things that?
On the check ride itself, I don't, well, before my first, so I actually had 2 attempts at a check ride. I didn't fail one, but my airplane failed one. So on my first check ride attempt, before we even, when we were just establishing establishing eligibility prior to even starting the oral, he asked to see the airplane's registration, and it turned out I had the wrong registration. It's a club airplane, and someone else in the club said they got our new registration and put it in the airplane, and they did not. And I had the registration that had the old owner's name on it. And so I guess that's one thing that can go wrong. But also prior to that, I had some maintenance issue, or I don't know if you can call it a maintenance issue, but I had a FOD issue before that, because someone, like the gas pumps, they have these little rubber cap things, and I guess the tie on that broke, and someone tried to fill it up and like didn't take it off, and the cap fell into the gas tank. And it was the day before my check ride was supposed to be, and I was like, if I don't get this out tonight, like I'm gonna have to postpone my check ride, and it's gonna be weeks before the DPE can come again. So I was there like with friends, like fishing all night, like fishing with flashlights and everything, trying to get that stupid thing out. But we got it, and then check ride didn't happen anyway. But
Oh my God, I
but
can't.
the real check ride, things went fairly smoothly, other than that issue with not allowing closed pattern work.
And I mean, and I've heard stories too of like people who, were renting from their flight school and they came out in the plane. One person who's out in California who I talk with quite a bit, he was telling me he came out and there was like a screw missing from a wheel pant or something like that. And the DPE was like, you're missing a screw here. We're not going anywhere unless you can get that screw replaced. And so it's like, so then you start thinking, well, God, that really, all these problems because someone else can screw up the airplane for you. But let me tell you, as someone who bought an airplane in the midst of my training, having your own airplane doesn't make it any better. Anybody who is following my saga on social media, because I vent everything on social media, apparently, like literally the week before my check ride, I had it all scheduled. I'm looking forward to everything. I go out to my plane one day, I step up on the wing. I'm talking to a Cherokee here. And, the wing is sitting like this. I step up on it, it goes, boom. Cold weather in Wisconsin, the strut gave out. And I spent the whole week leading up to my, my check ride trying to get this dealt with because, anybody who's dealing with aircraft mechanics knows that it's hard to get in.
Oh yeah.
Because we have an aircraft. We all know about the pilot shortage. People don't realize there's a mechanic shortage too. And I'll tell you, these guys they moved mountains to get my plane in. They rebuilt the strut. It still failed. Literally the day of the check ride, one of the mechanics came in at 7 a.m. and filled the strut and got it secured that it would, at least get me a few days and be safe and whatever. But like, it does. One thing you learn no matter what is planes break. And they break in ways that your cars don't. And when they break, you can't just go drive it anyway. You can't just go fly it anyway, like you do, with your car. So,
and it can be like a stupid thing you don't even need, like a wheel pant screw. Like it's probably totally fine, but
you can't take the wheel pants off either because then you have weight and balance and all the other things you have to do again, right? I mean, it's like, and that's not considered preventative maintenance. That's something an A&P has to do. Like, it's, and you don't realize all that. It's crazy.
They're always broken, and it's always expensive to fix them. But actually, since you mentioned that, do you want to talk a bit about your decision to buy a plane? And did you buy a plane kind of towards the beginning, or were you training in something else for a while and got sick of renting, or how did that go?
I trained in a 172, right?
Okay.
My my school was either 150s or 172s, and I wanted something at least with some horsepower. No, nothing against 150s, but they're small and they're, they don't have a lot of power, and I just wanted, a little bit more. But yeah, I mean, my intention, honestly, when I started, and I told people this, like, there's no way I'm buying an airplane. Like, because people would ask, like, they joking, like, so you're gonna buy your own airplane now? I'm like, no, I'm just gonna rent, or I'll find a flying club, because I had flown with some friends who, he was in a Cirrus flying club. So my very first GA flight, by the way, was in a Cirrus SR-22. Talk about seeing the high end of the
other
world.
Airplanes were ruined for you.
But so, I didn't know. I go to this school. I didn't realize how worked these planes get, and he goes out there and he shows me their 1974, Cessna 172M, which of course has seen better days. I mean, it's been worked, right? I mean, it's safe, it's whatever, but you can tell
it's not a Cirrus.
So I'm like, all right, so this is not really the plane I want to rent. And then I started learning about weight and balance and useful load. And it was really not the plane for my mission. I mean, I wanted the plane to do the weekend trips to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, or, go do the $100 hamburger, or fly to Minneapolis to visit family or whatever. So I'm like, well, okay, flying clubs. Well, I started looking around the airport. There aren't really any flying clubs at my airport. I would have had to drive an hour and a half out to Madison to really get into a flying club that had a plane that, met my mission. So that's when I started looking, and it just happened. I didn't really think I would buy until after, but I just happened to find the right airplane. It was local. It was what I wanted. It had everything I needed. It had a low time engine. It was, had been used mostly in Arizona, so corrosion wasn't likely, and indeed it was clean. And so, that was, it worked out. I changed jobs. I got a job that paid me a lot more. So I had some new disposable income I didn't have before. So I could afford, some of that too. And that's kind of how it worked out. But so I know you actually had luck. You mentioned you had luck finding a flying club.
Yeah. So yeah. And I was trying to decide, should I rent? Should I find a flying club? Should I buy? And my conclusion was I should rent. That's kind of, I made a big spreadsheet and I calculated everything out, and I said, you know what, I should rent. And then it turns out I couldn't rent. There was just nothing to rent. Because that one flight school that we have here was just like, they didn't want my money. I don't know. Like, it was just giant waiting list, and they just never let me in. And I pursued every option. I was trying to form partnerships with different friends, saying, hey, can we go in together and buy an airplane? Because buying it on my own was mostly out of the question. But I tried forming a club. I looked at all sorts of different opportunities, individuals who might just be willing to rent me their airplane. And I was exploring a lot of different avenues at once, and none of them were quite working out. And there was one club that only had an RV-12, which is a great airplane, but their insurance wouldn't allow students. So I said, okay, well, that's not going to work. But then as I was looking to buy airplanes, and I was talking to my flight instructor, he wasn't my flight instructor yet, but I was planning on flying with him, and eventually did. I was like sending him things like, hey, should I buy this one? Should we form a club with this? And he was kind of helping me try to find an airplane as well. And he's like, hey, I found this club. It was the same club that I already found. That was the RV-12 club. But they said, hey, they're actually looking to buy a second airplane. So I got their contact information, and I just harassed them every day. And I like sent them ads from Trade a Plane and Barnstormers, like, hey, buy this. Hey, buy this. What do you think of this plane? Do you like this plane? And, they had been wanting to buy a second airplane for quite a while, but I think they didn't have like anyone pushing them. And I don't know if it was my annoyance that made them eventually do it or not, but I like to think that I helped kind of make this club buy the second airplane. And then after that, it was like a 4-member club. I joined, we started recruiting everyone, and now we're up to like 30 and trying to buy a third airplane. So it's been growing like really fast, and it's really exciting. But I guess the moral of the story is, like, if you can't find an opportunity, like, go and make an opportunity.
So there's another podcast out there, Midlife Pilot.
Mm-hmm.
And he did something similar. He actually, I mean, I know some of the folks here tonight are also, frequent that podcast. And like, he actually went out and like started his own club. He's doing like, he's talking now to other people about how to start, a flying club. So that's fascinating. But
I think it's a really good way to go.
it's
I mean, there are
incredible.
pros and cons for sure. Like the nice thing about you owning your airplane is you're the only one to break it. And there's no one's leaving FOD in your gas tank except for you, right?
Yeah, this is true. Yeah, if someone does it was me, or I was standing there when one of the line guys at the airport did it, and
Yeah.
But
and it's nice that your plane's never reserved by someone else. But the nice thing about a club is now I can have different airplanes for different missions.
Yeah.
As long as especially once we have a lot of members, then we'll have a bigger variety in airplanes. And it's like, okay, I can take the Cherokee 6 to do this, and I can take the Cub to do this, and whatever,
And that can't be underestimated. Like that is, I'm saying this right now as my plane's getting ready to go into annual. So what am I doing? I'm talking to both the school that has an aero, so I can get my, my complex certification. So I know there was a question, I can't find it now. Someone asked, what's your next plan? That's mine right now, is I want my complex endorsement. But then there's another one that has a Warrior. So I'm trying to get, checked out in that if the weather would cooperate, just so I have backups. But yeah, that is a cool part about a club, having that option. But you did also mention, I will say the one thing that worked out great for me, a lot of things did, but as far as buying the airplane, was shortly after I bought my airplane, the school had one of their 172s. They have 3 of them in 2 locations. Well, one of them went down and has been out of service now for like 4 months almost. And so imagine the scheduling nightmares of going from, down 33% in terms of availability on your airplanes.
Yeah.
And so, where there was this mad scramble for scheduling. It's like, I could go fly whenever I wanted because I was endorsed solo. And if I needed the CFI, well, half the time, he was more available than ever before because they just didn't have as many planes. So there were 2 CFIs there and 1 airplane. Well, okay. But so let's go back. I wanted to catch this question from Fly Sport, because I hear a lot of people talk about how the check ride is a learning opportunity. Did you learn something from your DP?
Yes. Can't think of what it is. So I definitely did. I have to think about it. I will say one thing is that a DPE is not supposed to instruct, right?
Correct.
But I think it would be hard to go through an entire check ride without learning something. Because so even though they're not allowed to instruct, they might kind of hint, right?
Well,
and then go ahead.
I was just gonna say, you have to remember too, right? Like they're not there to instruct, but you are having a conversation, and things are going to come up, and they're going to ask you questions you don't necessarily know the answers to.
Yeah.
And you can go look it up, but a lot of times they're going to give you that extra something, because at the end of the day, they want us all to be safe.
Yeah, no, it's true. And they're all instructors. So like, I think it's kind of in their nature to instruct, even if they're not supposed to. I guess one thing I remember learning is, the DPE, when I was doing my pre-flight, he was asking me what all the different antennas do, and I didn't know. But he kind of hinted me along. He's like, well, GPS satellites are up high, so it kind of makes sense that might be on the top of the plane, right? I'm like, yes, that does make sense. And like, okay, and the comms are usually talking to someone on the ground. And, kind of like hinted around a little bit about, like where I might want to.
Identical ones on the tail.
There are 2 of these things,
why
right?
would you do that?
Yeah. So, I guess I learned some of that. And then the other thing is, this is something I didn't know going into it, is that, and I don't know if every DPE does this, but after the check ride was passed and we go inside to like do the paperwork and stuff, he did a really good debrief where he went over everything he jotted down and had a bunch of comments on everything I did. And right. I wish that I had been prepared to take notes on that, because while he's talking about, what I did wrong in my steep turn, I'm thinking, I'm a pilot. So I have no idea what he said in that whole debrief, but I know he went into like a lot of detail, and there was some of the stuff I might have remembered for a minute, but like I couldn't tell you much of what he said.
I mean, the biggest thing I remember is we got into a really, really good conversation about aborting takeoffs. I mean, we went in a lot of different places, but this was really good. I mean, he actually, first of all, he explained to me how they test all those performance factors. But the really cool thing he taught is, everybody, okay, I found out not everybody, a lot of people know about the 50-70 rule, right? If you get to 50% of the runway and you're not at 70% of your rotate speed, shut it down.
Mhm.
He's like, so your plane, your performance says you're supposed to take off in 1,750 feet to clear a 50-foot obstacle, all that, right? He's like, if you're on a 6,000 foot runway, are you going to roll out to 3,000 feet and only then realize you're still on the ground, that maybe you should shut it down? Shouldn't you be doing that sooner? And we got into a really good conversation. I was like, that's actually a really good point. Like the 50-70 rule, great with airliners, maybe, where, it's a little, the runway situation, all that's a little bit different. But yeah, I mean, my Cherokee, if I'm not off the ground at my home airport, especially if I'm taking off by myself, I'm not off the ground in 700 feet, something's wrong. And I should be looking at, RPMs and understanding what the heck is going on, or, where did the engine go? Like, so that was, I thought, kind of an interesting thing. And it was a really good conversation.
So I'm curious, have you ever aborted a takeoff for real?
Only in practice.
Okay.
And that was the other thing he went to then, was like, we should really be practicing more with aborting takeoffs, because people, it's a hard decision, because you keep like, oh, well, I'm almost there. Just especially if you're a little heavy and whatever, if you're close to that gross weight, you might want to, I'll just wait I just wait. He's like, the thing he pointed out is the hard part is making that decision to actually pull the throttle back and, taxi off and figure out what's going on. So what about you? I mean, have you been put?
Yeah, one. So first off, my instructor never had me do an aborted takeoff. And the only one I've done so far, it was the scariest moment I've ever had in an airplane. Because it was that the day before my first check ride was supposed to be, right after I finished fishing that thing out of the gas tank. Which, by the way, I saw that Aero Grizzly's on here. He helped me fish that out. But I thought, hey, I'm gonna have a check ride tomorrow. Let's do a couple laps around the pattern, right? So I got out there, and since I had drained one of the gas tanks and put some gas back in, anyway, it turned out that my tanks were not even. So I was like a little bit worried that like one wing is going to be a lot heavier than the other. But I was like, I think it's close enough. And I think it probably was close enough. But what I didn't know is that the last person to fly it adjusted the rudder trim quite a bit. So I started taking off, and as soon as my nose wheel came up, it was just weird. It scared me so bad. I started like kind of, kind of going side to side or whatever. And I think it turned out that the rudder only just put me like a little to the right, but I just stomped right. It put me one way, and I overcorrected. And it scared me. So I pulled the throttle. I'm like, abort. And I called the tower. I'm like, hey, I'm aborting to take off. And then taxied back to fuel. And then just got out of the airplane and like breathed for a while, because it scared me. And I got out my GoPro, because I filmed everything for my channel. And I was like, okay, what on earth happened? Because I had no idea what happened. And I called up my instructor, like, hey, what's going on? Because I didn't want to be scared to fly the day before my check ride. Right? It was the only time I was like scared to fly. But he kind of like talked me down a bit, and he told me, oh yeah, when I was flying yesterday, we adjusted the rudder trim a bunch. And I was like, okay. And then I took off again, and it was fine. But I don't know if I needed to abort, because once I got if I had pulled up, or if I kept going and gotten in the air, it probably would have been fine. But it scared me, so I pulled power, and I felt like I handled the abort well, not the rotation super well, but it scared me. But I got back in and flew again.
Well, I think that's an important lesson, though, right? If something doesn't feel right, we shouldn't be afraid to drop the power, get off the runway, figure out what happened. I mean, you also bring up an interesting, it's nice, but it's also, it scares me a little with owning my own plane. And that is, I don't have to worry about someone else messing with the rudder trim, right? I know where it's going to be, because it's going to be wherever I said it the last time. But one thing I've been really focused on is not letting that turn into complacency and just assuming that everything is where it was the last time, right? I mean, it's easy to do that, but yeah, I mean, the reality is I've got on-field mechanics who have access to my hangar, and if I know that there's a particular squawk item on my plane, I know that sometimes they'll just go grab my plane and fix it, which is really cool, by the way. That's part of the really coolness of being in a small town. But at the same time, like, yeah, I could come back. If they forgot to call me and let me know they did something, things happen in hangars, I mean, step on the wing and the thing falls. Sucks. But, so, wow. I've totally lost track of the questions, but I remember some of them. I just can't find them to put them on the screen. But I know there was a question. I think it might have been from, here it is. This is an important question. What was your first flight after passing? I mean, for me, honestly, first of all, it was actually the flight from the DPE's airport back home.
Okay.
Like literally, because I had to fly up to a northerly airport. But I'll talk about my real first flight. But what was yours?
Yeah, so my first flight was quite short, but it was to me it was important to take my kids and my wife flying, like, first off, like, because they had to sacrifice a lot while I was doing all the training, like they get the first flight. My plan was to take my wife very first, but we didn't have time before the kids got home from school, and we didn't have a babysitter. And the Cherokee 140 has 4 seats, and I have 3 kids and a wife, so I can't take the whole family, which really stinks. So I ended up taking my kids, and it was super short because someone else had the airplane reserved, and my kids, I told them they couldn't go until they finished their homework, and they waited till the last second. But I got up, I took the kids, and we just flew around the pattern, we just flew out kind of to the practice area for a bit. And they were all like super excited until we took off. And then my daughter's like, I'm scared, I want to land. So it was short for multiple reasons, I guess, but it took them down, and it was good to get flying. The first flight I took with my wife was several weeks later, because just scheduling wasn't working out. But I took her out to a restaurant in Camarillo that I really wanted to go to because I heard it was super good. And so that was my first attempt at like $100 hamburger type situation.
Nice.
I landed there, found out the restaurant was closed.
Oh no!
So I've yet to have like a positive experience with my wife in the airplane, but it'll happen.
It'll come.
So, yeah.
It'll come. So I'll tell you about mine. I'm gonna couple it with this question from Rom Geek because how difficult you find it talking to ATC. So first of all, background, and I'll share my first flight, and then I'll talk about why it ties into this. So I don't know about you, but I trained at a non-towered airport, and very reasonably small non-towered airport. That's actually the airport diagram up here because I still can't point this thing. So it's 2 crossing runways, so it's a little bigger, but it's not busy at all, right? And so the only ATC practice I really got were I was signed off. There's that same airport I told you about I grew up near. Well, it's less than 25 miles from me, so I could solo there. And so I got some practice there, but it's a little class Delta. It's not very busy either. And it's a flight school class Delta, so they're used to students and whatever, right? And the only other time I did was my longer of the 2 solo cross countries. I flew into a class Charlie up in Green Bay, and in a class Delta, but a commercial class Delta in Appleton, Wisconsin. So for my first flight then, I went back to Appleton to pick up, my sister lives there. And I took her down to Janesville, Wisconsin, where there's a restaurant called Bessie's that a lot of people talk about. It's supposed to be great and whatever. And did the $100 hamburger run. They literally have a burger called the $100 hamburger. Right. But it was cool because it was the first time. That was actually the first time I ever had a call from the ramp or from the FBO to get taxi clearance. Because every other time it was always full stop taxi back, both on the cross country and all the training I did. I never had the opportunity other than the solo landings at the class Delta that you have to do, 3 solo landings at a towered airport. But even that, it was just go back, pick up the flight instructor and just go right back out. This was the first time I actually had to go through that whole process. And it was interesting. Like, so, as far as how difficult did I find it? I mean, at least for me, it was hard at first. Mostly just because there was so much else going on you're trying to think of, and then trying to remember how to talk. And you see all these, videos of people talking to ATC, and everybody's kind of got their own way. And then my instructor's got his own way he's expecting me to do it. And the tower's expecting certain things in their own little kind of, each airport I found out has a little bit of their own idiosyncrasies. And so, I think initially it was, but honestly, that first flight I took, like, I felt like I was there, everything. The only thing I regret in that wasn't actually the communication with tower. It was, and I actually posted about this, I think in one of the groups on Facebook, was I learned to be more assertive with the tower. So I'm leaving Appleton after dropping my sister off, going to head back home. And the winds are like, 220 at 14, gusting up to like 21 on the ATIS.
Okay.
So I'm like, all right, well, not bad. And I know they've got 2 runways, crossing runways. And I call up and I get my taxi. He said, yeah, taxi to runway 30 via November and Papa. I'm like, well, that's not really what I wanted, but all right, well, I guess I'm going to try a strong crosswind here, because that, 2-2 versus 3-0, that's almost, straight across. Thankfully, as I'm taxiing out, he comes back on the radio and goes, winds are, whatever it was, 220 at 14, gusting 21. Would you like runway 21 instead? I'm like, basically the professional version of yes, please, But what I realized is that should have been me calling them and saying, hey, you know what? When he gave me 3-0, like, could I get 2-1 instead? Like, I knew why they didn't want to, and I realized I was intimidated because it's a big commercial airport, and 2-1 is their long runway where they land all the commercial airliners. I mean, I had just landed behind an A320 on the way in. So, learned a lesson. But how about you? I mean, what was your ATC experience?
Yeah, so I definitely practiced a lot before I even started my training. So just listening to live ATC, practicing and ground school, and so I practiced a lot. But I think it's definitely a skill that you're never really done learning. I think even experienced pilots, they still learn more about talking to ATC. I was pretty lucky though in terms of the way my airport is towered, because I trained at a towered airport, but I was usually training at like sunrise to try to get my lesson in before work, and the tower doesn't open until 7. So I'd get a lot of both uncontrolled and controlled experience, even on the same flight. Like a lot of times I'd take off on towered and land on a towered airport. But there's still like, talking to the tower, I feel pretty comfortable. But then once you get away from the tower and talking to flight following or whatever, I don't have as much experience. But I think it's kind of funny. I feel like student pilots, they're often not afraid of weather and not afraid of short runways, but they're terrified of talking to someone on the radio. And I think that the important thing to do is just like try not to be afraid, because like you might embarrass yourself, and who cares? I've embarrassed myself on the radio. I think every single student pilot and actual pilot is going to embarrass themselves on the radio, but just talk to them like they're humans. And if you don't understand what you're supposed to say, just ask what you're supposed to say, like just talk to them and don't worry too much about it, I think.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think we all hear the horror stories, and I realized even in that moment with me, it was like I was afraid to frustrate them or to make them crabby. Like, and I realized after he called me and he gave me the other runaway, I'm like, that was really dumb. Like, if he gets crabby with me for asking for the better runway as far as for wins, like, that's on him, not me. Like, come on. And so it was a good lesson to learn. It was a good way to learn it. And this is a good point too, from flying in the Midwest or flying Midwest. It's, who, yeah, for those that do train, and I've heard this before, people who've trained at like Class Charlies or even Deltas and, are used to it, they get terrified flying into, wait, what? There's no controller? We're all just on our own out here? And it's, I mean, it's weird. Whatever you learn first is like, I think, where you become most comfortable. I mean, as comfortable as I could ever be. I mean, I'll admit, non-towered airports are not the most fun thing in the world. I've had my moments. I mean, I've had to, go on CTAF and be like, yeah, I'm going to make a 360 to avoid a traffic conflict out here because, some dude came screaming in on the 45 and didn't, his position calls were wrong. He's, announcing that he's on a crosswind. No, he came in from outside and on a 45, and things like that. And you realize, okay, well, people do dumb things, and I'm sure I've done dumb things too. And, so you can't get crabby about it, but yeah, and I'll admit that's where, ADSB comes in handy. I could see that he had, I didn't have him in sight right away, but I could see right away on ADSB his position calls weren't making sense. And so I knew to kind of watch for him. And then sure enough, I see him entering the pattern. Do you use ForeFlight? Because I know we had a question about that earlier too.
I have not. I have it installed. I subscribed recently, so I'm going to use it for the first time very soon here. So for me, and for those who don't know, like, so my YouTube channel is centered around like how to cut costs everywhere you can, right? It's just how to be absolutely cheap. Because my goal is to help people who feel like they don't have enough money to fly to find out that maybe they do. So I did not subscribe to ForeFlight during my training because there's, they're $120 I can save, right? However, I've decided to do it because my Cherokee, it has ADSB via an old school Stratus that's only compatible with ForeFlight. So like I can only see ADSB in if I have ForeFlight. So I'm also like really, really anti-Apple. I'm very much an Android guy, and it kills me that ForeFlight does not have an Android app. It pains me.
I am equally pained and more horrified that I've actually purchased now 2 of these things for this purpose. But I mean, so what I found was, first of all, I was dumb, went out and bought the larger one, the Air 10.9 or whatever. Well, it was great until I got the Cherokee. And then you realize there's really no good place to mount this thing in here. Like, I expected this to have more space than there actually is in the cockpit. And so that's why I got the smaller one because, well, I could, it's actually cool because now I use both, which is really ridiculous. But I've got a backup. I knew, my DP was cool using it on the check ride. I use it to log my flights. I actually keep the paper logs too, but I do both. I'm kind of nostalgic. And so like, I've got the logbook and I've got it all tabbed out still from the check ride, but so I make sure they stay in sync and whatever, but there's things in that logbook I'm going to cherish forever. Right. Like, I mean, that first solo sign off, and even my CFI marked it in big letters, but I do use the flight tracker in ForeFlight because it also has a timer on it, which is really good for those of us in Cherokees where you have to switch tanks because we don't have that cool both feature like the Cessnas do.
Yep.
But yeah, I actually like having both because now I've got the little one mounted on the yoke, and that's where my taxi plates show up, right? And it's and I've got the plane that I bought also came with the Stratus ESG, which is the latest transponder. It's got the later Stratus that works with more than ForeFlight. At that point, I was vested anyway. So.
Yep. But even despite the fact that I'm cheap and I hate Apple, I've got to admit it's a good product. So I think ForeFlight's great. I think you should learn how to do stuff without ForeFlight because tablets overheat and run out of batteries and stuff. But I think it's a good resource.
And that's fair, And I definitely I've got my backup plans. having learned at a non-towered airport that does have its own VOR on the field, it's like, all right, well, I'm good with navigating VOR. Eventually, hopefully get a GPS in my plane, but it doesn't now. But I will say this. These are from my cross country. I kept them, again, that nostalgia thing. But if I never have to write another nav log as long as I live, I will be a quite happy person.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I spent, especially, so I'm an engineer, right? And my engineering brain will not let me just say, oh, about 8 gallons per hour, we'll call that good. So like every time I did my flight planning, then I had to figure out the density altitude and figure out, like what's the temperature going to be, and like, figure out, okay, how many gallons is it actually, even though it's still like wildly inaccurate because the data for my Cherokee is super old and like is based on the Cherokee 140, but it's had so many upgrades to it that like it's not right anyway. But still, I have to like do all that engineering. So I would spend hours every single cross country I planned, and I'm done doing that.
Yeah. I mean, and that's, even understanding that, I want backups for the iPad. It's like, I use SkyVector a lot, and I did for my cross countries. I would, because then I would use SkyVector to kind of check my math and everything too, make sure. I mean, I wanted to do the math. I wanted to understand how to do this the right way and, I bought the electronic E6B because that whizzy wheel thing is, come on. That's from the 1930s. I don't need to, there's better options. But, so yeah, it's like now I think, I still want to have a nav log. I think it's good to have. I think it's good to have a plan for, your VFR checkpoints. I don't want to just follow the magic magenta line, but I would rather just do it in SkyVector, print off that nav log from there, and then that's my backup. And I prefer to just really know the terrain that I'm flying through anyway. And, it's like, and that's I think how I'm probably going to end up doing it more often than not at this point is, it'll be for flight first, or if I get a GPS into the Cherokee eventually. But I mean, which I do want to do, because that brings us into another question that we have to address, which I can't find in the chat right now because it was asked early on. But what comes next? What's next for you?
That's a really good question for me, because I'm not entirely sure. I mean, so for immediately just flying around, for me, I love flying because I love flying, and I'm okay landing at the same airport where I took off. I just like to go fly around. I'll do some short cross-country trips here and there, go to a restaurant. In terms of future ratings, I would love to be a part-time CFI someday. I think that would be really cool. So that to me is a higher priority than, like instrument or anything. I'll probably get an instrument as well, but CFI to me
you need to get there, don't you?
Actually, you don't, but I don't know if I've ever met a CFI that didn't have an instrument rating. You do have to have a commercial rating, and I could be wrong on that. I don't think you have to have an instrument, but
I thought you had to have an instrument to get the commercial, but I could be wrong completely.
I'm not sure. But yeah, I'd love to be a CFI. As far as flying, just flying around, and I unfortunately can't really do like family trips because 5-seat airplanes are way more expensive than 4-seat airplanes. So.
You got to get that Cherokee 6 in the club.
Yeah, I know. Cherokee 6 one day. I'm working on it. I'm bugging people. I'm being annoying again. So
300 horsepower, 6-place plane, that ought to be able to carry the family pretty nicely.
Yep. How about you? Said you're interested in a complex rating, right? Which surprises me since you own a non-complex airplane.
Yeah, I mean, again, part of it is options. Like, I want to have that under my belt. So instead of, having to get it in the future, if I want to rent that Arrow, now I've got it. And if I want to rent the Arrow sometime, I mean, it's a great performing aircraft. It's good. We both work in tech. I kind of have that engineering mind too. And I really like to understand kind of how some of those other things work. Like I don't have, I've got fixed pitch prop. Wow. That I didn't realize how hard that was to say. I just tried to say it. And yeah, no, I don't have retractable gear. So, it's like understanding just how that works when you have a constant speed prop and, all that. I'm just getting into that right now. So, and that's kind of, it's a nice immediate thing I can do. Their insurance requires 10 hours in it before I'll be, signed off, and before, my instructor at that point will of course give me the endorsement and whatever, and I'm good. But ultimately my goal right now, I'm doing that just kind of because it's there, but kind of like you, it's like I kind of want to just enjoy it for a bit. Like it was so much study and stress and trying to get it done because I was really hoping to get it done before the end of the year. Hey, goal achieved there. But is so it's for me now, it is kind of, I'll eventually go into instrument. I already did start ground school for instrument just because the weather here has been atrocious. We're on day 9 of overcast at about 1,000 feet with tops up over flight level 30. So I'm not going anywhere. Even if I had my instrument rating, I wouldn't be going anywhere because that's 30,000 feet worth of clouds to try to get through. No, thank you. I don't have a plane that goes that high. But yeah, so I'll eventually get my instrument, but for me, that's as far as I want to go. I have a nasty habit of taking really fun hobbies and turning them into jobs, and then it usually kind of ruins the hobby for me. So I swore to myself early on with this, I was not going to get a commercial, which actually I might now, but for other reasons. Definitely don't want to be a CFI just because that's then it becomes a job for me, and I don't want that. The commercial, the only reason why I'll do that is because my CFI was encouraging it as just a way to continue to build proficiency, right? Like, just because
the nice thing about commercial is that the requirements are largely, a lot of it's the same sort of maneuvers you do private, just to higher tolerances. So it's just a good goal to perfect things.
Yeah, and you add in a few like lazy eights and chandelles, I think, come into play. But yeah, so wow, we're pretty well out of time, and I know we didn't get to all the questions. I feel bad about that, but there was a lot to go through. I am going to throw one more question your way, and then I know I have my thoughts on this too. But if you had to give one piece of advice to somebody just getting ready to start their private pilot career, what's it going to be?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it would probably be to don't do it alone. Like there's such a community amongst pilots. So like if you don't have any piloting friends, like I hereby declare you my friend. Go reach out to me. You have a friend now, right? Because I've gotten so much help from all of my friends and associates in the piloting community. And when you have a question, there's so many people that are willing to answer. Now you have to make sure you ask a lot of people, because everyone you ask is going to give you a different answer. No two pilots have ever agreed on anything. But like definitely like find the community, and like we've already got it. We have this chat of people who largely have never met each other, and they're already like giving each other people advice, right? Pilots just love to get together and talk and share information. So reach out to me, reach out to Alyssa. We met each other on the student pilot community on Facebook. That's a great community. Just go find people to ask for advice. And if you're saying, hey, I want to be a pilot someday, but that day's not today, get into that community anyway and get the encouragement that you need, and we'll trick you into getting your license sooner. So that's my advice. Just find people that'll help you through it.
Wow, mine's way more tactical than that. But and you'll hear this a lot, and I can't stress enough from my own experience how important this is. If you're thinking about getting your private pilot license or certificate, excuse me, the very first thing, even before you buy ground school or talk to a CFI, go get your medical, especially if money is tight. I went in, I'm fairly athletic. I stay pretty fit most of the time, although lately a little less, but that's a different story. But was confident, like, okay, I got no medical issues, no problem, whatever. Didn't realize the types of things. I even read up, but there are so many things that you can have in your past that the FAA will latch onto. And there were two things ultimately I had to contend with. The first was my medical was just outright deferred because of surgery that I had had the year before. It was, whatever. So I had to go through a whole bunch of process with that. And that's a long process. And there's no guarantees that at the end of it, you're going to come out with a medical certificate. So it would really suck to go through, get deferred, go through all sorts of flight training in the meantime, only to find out you're not going to get it because you're going to spend a lot of money. The other thing that I had that I didn't think about is I have a color deficiency. And the reason I didn't think about it is because it's not color blindness, right? It's not like I can't tell colors apart. But with reds, sometimes I don't perceive as much red as other people. And so very close shades of blues and purples kind of can be, a problem. But that ended up being the thing that showed up. And I had to go through the whole occupational color vision test, which if you want to know more about that, by the way, if you have a color vision issue and you want to hear about that one, hit me up on Facebook or, through YouTube or whatever. I'll share a ton of that. We're out of time here, but so long. I'm making this a really long story. It didn't need to be. Get the medical done. Get it done right away. People will say that and you might blow it off. I kind of blew it off. I just was like, I'm 45. I'm super healthy. I got no problems. I'm not on any meds. This won't be an issue. It was an issue. And it took a while. It took me writing to my senator to get the FAA motivated to get it processed and done. Trust me, you don't want to be sitting there shelling out $200, $300, $400 a lesson while you're not sure if you're even going to get a medical and be able to fly in the first place.
That's cool. Good advice. I didn't heed it, but I got lucky. But when I was getting my medical, I was like, oh shoot, what if I don't pass the vision test or something? And that would really, really stink. So,
and this is actually a good point to get a consultation before you actually go for the official session with the AMA or AME, excuse me. Because here's the thing. If you are going to have something that's going to preclude you, once you fail, once you get deferred and then you get denied, you're wiped out of everything. The cool thing with the light sport option, as Aero Grizzly points out here, is that as long as you haven't failed one, you're okay to fly. Now, you have to sign off that you meet certain requirements and whatever, and there's some other things. But, be aware that third class medical is more stringent than the light sport requirements. And if you fail that third class medical, you're out of light sport now too. And it's a weird, one of those weird gotchas with the FAA, but it's something to be aware of. And I think that's really good too. Cause that was another thing I looked at. And then Flying Midwest, was talking about AOPA, and they do have AOPA as a great service. I used it when I was going through the deferral process. Strongly suggest that too, especially if you think there's any chance at all that you might have anything that could possibly cause you to get deferred. Talk to AOPA first and work with them. This is all really, really good advice here. All right. Well, we went a lot longer than I thought we would. Actually, I kind of suspected we might go pretty long here, but it's been great. So Nate, thanks so much. Again, check out Nate's channel. It's awesome. I absolutely love it.
Thanks.
Just how to get through this stuff, get through it cheap. So, all right. Well, hey, everybody, take care. Nate, take care.
You too. Thank you.
All right.
And we'll talk to you all later.